this is another one of these places that gets a lot of attention and discussion / argument about exactly how to play the hairpins. Because generally, you know, someone will think it's not enough. There's not enough profile of them. Someone else thinks that if it's too much, it feels rather seasick to play it. So we're always varying that, and we need to also make a difference between the first one, which is a sort of an up and down, and the second one, which is just, and then a piano afterwards. So yeah, there's a lot to think about in this. Again, it's in a way, it's quite a straightforward melody, but he's packed it full of stuff.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about this too, also related to dance music. And the fact that these swells happen every 2 bars exactly. If you think of a waltzing couple, it takes 2 bars to do a complete revolution. So the fact that every 2 bars you have something happen, to me, you can translate that as a kind of musical Doppler effect. You know, if you're the dancers and you're on the dance floor, then every 2 bars you pan past the orchestra or the musician, and you're going to have a little spike in volume. I wonder whether Beethoven is actually putting you in the shoes of a dancer at that point.
Would you like to hear a version that's more? I'll try and exaggerate those more.
Sure. Yeah. Great.
I think that was a little bit different anyway.
Yeah, it was. And actually, when you start to, well, I was thinking as you were playing that in terms of actual dancing, and it makes you realize how fast it is. If you're trying to dance at that speed, it's really whirling. It's like, that's a really fast waltz.
Well, and that's another argument in the quartet, is how fast to play it. But it's marked allegro assai, so I tend to use that as some ammunition to play a fairly fast tempo for it. And also, the movements that surround it, I think, are slower. So I think this should have the contrast of being quite fleeting.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, I don't think it ever sounds too fast as music, but it can sound too fast if you start to think in dance. And I feel like those swells might just help you remember how fast that would feel if you were dancing. Because there's a danger if they're not there that it just sounds like a pleasant tune without any kind of, you know, dynamic urgency to it or not.
Well, I think grounding it in your body is sort of incredibly important, and just the marking reminds you to do that, right? I mean, the other Alla danza tedesca that I always think of is the first movement of Opus 79, which people play generally immensely fast, really, really fast. There's absolutely no way that you could dance to something in 3 like that. On the other hand, it's quite possible that playing just sounds, I don't know, dumb or wrong, or somehow too obvious, or perhaps Beethoven being too popular, you know, that we want to charge through it to give it some kind of musical sensibility above and beyond its sort of danceable one. I wonder about the hairpins, actually. I wonder about your calling them dynamic markings. That's the only thing that I would perhaps, I'm not sure I disagree with you. I think I agree that it's doing something to do with the dance and the experience of dance. But I tend to think that hairpins in Beethoven, and actually in his contemporaries in Schubert too, and you know, later in the 19th century, right the way through Brahms, aren't just or maybe even mostly sometimes a dynamic marking, you know, that, and we see that because, you know, apart from anything else, we'll often see these markings and crescendo and diminuendo used simultaneously in a way that might appear tautology if it weren't that a hairpin is obviously one of these sort of morphological markings that's asking for a particular kind of gestural character, a particular kind of more, whether that's more time or a kind of a hastening, and that's particularly in this this kind of marking. And I also, having looked at some of the you know, fair copies of manuscripts for not the quartets but certainly in the piano music, but in both Beethoven and Schubert, it's really interesting that what counts as an accent like that and what counts as a hairpin, often you can't really tell the difference. They sort of go And when you try and figure out the difference, you sometimes realize, well, it's sort of the same marking. You know, that it's frequently telling you to do the same thing, whether it's a coming down or a kind of growth. So I wonder if it's not a way of almost like notating in quite fussily a particular kind of push and pull dance feel that is there already in a German dance, that perhaps if you know how to dance one, if you've heard a lot, that you would just feel, much as you know what a salsa dance feels like if you do salsa dancing. But if you were to perhaps write a piano sonata that had a salsa movement, you might want to tell people or perhaps show the interpreter how to stretch the rhythm or how to make the meter sound in a distinctive way.
That's very interesting. So should I try, do you want me to try a version that's less about the dynamic and more about stretching?
Yeah, I mean, I guess more about what's often called a gogic, you know, maybe about time as much.
I mean, there's so many different ways to do the gogics. That was just one version.
I liked it. I felt myself go up on my tiptoes kind of with each one. Yeah.
How much, I wonder, can you relate that to the performance practice we usually associate with the Strauss waltzes, you know, where you're sort of anticipating the second beat? That's also a metrical thing rather than a dynamic thing. And just thinking of that in terms of actual dancing, every bar in a waltz, there is some kind of pushing or pulling motion. So, you know, it's such an equal dance because both partners have the same steps. But at the beginning of your half turn, someone has to kind of give more of an impetus so that the beginning of that gesture has more energy than the rest of it. So that kind of makes sense that you would have a kind of impetus and then less, you know, for each bar, every 2 bars or something like that.
Yeah, I'm also, sometimes when we rehearse it, because we get into this detailed discussion much like this, it's good, I might try and play it with everything stripped away, because it's again one of those things that Nick was talking about, that here we are discussing a relatively simple melody in great painstaking detail because of the way Beethoven's made us think about it. If I'll try and play it, you know, without any of this stuff, and we'll see what happens. Sometimes we use that as when we can't agree, we use that as a kind of a blank slate. Let's just start from 0 and then sort of see what we're missing and then build it up from there.